I mean, imagine handing a computer like a completely real, unaltered photograph.
Right, just a normal picture.
Yeah, exactly. A picture of yourself standing next to some famous politician. You hand it over, you ask the computer to describe the image, and the machine just analyzes it and says, this is a fake.
Which is crazy.
Right, and not because the pixels look manipulated or, the lighting is inconsistent or anything like that.
Yeah, it's not looking at the tech specs.
No. It says it's fake because it has mathematically calculated that the two of you would just never hang out. Like, it actually decides that reality is wrong simply because reality doesn't fit its statistical expectations.
It's a terrifying thought, really. The machine just overriding the truth because the truth is, well, too messy.
So welcome to today's deep dive. It is April 20, 2026, and today we have a really fascinating mission.
We really do.
We are unpacking this sweeping, highly provocative essay titled, "What Will Censorship Look Like in the Age of AI?" And let me tell you, this is going to challenge some serious assumptions you might have about the tools you use, like every single day.
Oh, absolutely.
We're exploring the chilling possibility that artificial intelligence isn't just, a helpful assistant for drafting emails or organizing your calendar. The source we're examining today argues that AI might actually be the most powerful mechanism for information control and really thought homogenization that humanity has ever built.
It is a profound paradigm shift. We're so conditioned to view these systems as neutral utility.
Yeah, like a calculator.
Exactly, like a calculator or a digital encyclopedia. You
Yep.
put a query in and you get a factual answer out. But the text asks us to look far past the user interface and dig into the underlying architecture of how these systems actually process reality.
Because you and I, and you listening right now, we all use AI for convenience.
Of course we do.
You might use it to prep for a major presentation, or maybe just to quickly summarize a long article you don't have time to read, and it feels completely seamless.
It feels like magic sometimes.
It does. But what if that very convenience is a Trojan horse? Like, what if, by letting the machine do the heavy lifting of thinking, we are silently handing over the keys to our own cognitive freedom?
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really grasp the scale of what the author is arguing, we have to look at the foundation of how information is actually served to us.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, today's discussion isn't just about some new software update or, tech industry gossip.
Right.
It is fundamentally about the survival of critical thinking in an era of absolute information overload. The author posits that at its core, AI represents a mythical level of information control.
Mythical, that's a heavy word.
That specific phrasing is crucial, yeah.
Mythical.
It suggests a scale, a reach, and an invisibility that goes far beyond a traditional government censor, like sitting in a room with a red pen crossing out words.
Yeah, it's not some guy at a desk. No, it's about controlling the very landscape of what is considered knowable.
And to really understand how that landscape is shifting, we need to rewind a bit to the massive disruption we saw just last year in 2025.
Oh, yeah. That was huge.
It really was the catalyst that brought this specific brand of panic to the forefront. A group of Chinese entrepreneurs pushed AI into completely new territories with a system called DeepSeek. But help me out here. Why was DeepSeek such a massive leap? Because the tech world seemed to just completely lose its mind over it.
They absolutely did lose their minds. It was a seismic event. Prior to DeepSeek, the prevailing assumption was that cutting-edge AI required massive brute force computing power and just exorbitant capital.
Right, like billions of dollars.
Exactly. Resources that were largely monopolized by a few Western tech giants. But DeepSeek completely upended that. It pushed search technology and complex reasoning into new territories using highly efficient, remarkably innovative architectures and at a fraction of the cost.
So it wasn't just, a slightly better chatbot. It was a fundamental shift in how the tech was even built.
Exactly. It triggered absolute panic within that highly competitive, Western-dominated AI landscape. It forced strategic shifts, caused major market disruptions, and essentially proved that the hegemony over global AI development was no longer a Western monopoly.
Wow.
But our source material uses this market disruption to force a much deeper reflection. The author argues it's not just about who builds the fastest or cheapest AI, it's about the underlying logic and control baked into the AI they build.
Right. And the author of our source material, who, by the way, has a long personal history of dealing with restrictive regimes, decided to test one of these new powerful AI tools.
Yes, and the test was so elegant.
It was brilliantly simple. The author just asked the AI about themselves. That's it. Basically, tell me about me. But the AI's response wasn't a biography. It was incredibly blunt. The machine simply replied, let's talk about something else.
A complete conversational shutdown. There was no argument, no attempt to sanitize the information, just a brick wall. And the source explicitly connects this specific mechanical response to decades-long strategies of censorship used by the Chinese regime.
Which is fascinating.
It really is. The author notes that for a very long time, the most effective strategy of control hasn't always been to actively argue against dissent. Often, it's simply refusing to acknowledge the existence of certain topics entirely.
It's the strategy of just pretending the problem doesn't exist. Like, if we don't talk about it, it's not real.
Precisely. To deny freedom of expression by acting as if the forbidden subject simply isn't there. The author points out the stark contrast between these utopian state slogans we often hear, like a shared future for mankind or one world, one dream, and the meticulous, quiet reality of suppressing any contradictions to that dream.
Now, just to be super clear here, the author's goal isn't to push a specific political agenda about the Chinese regime, but to draw a mechanical parallel.
Right, it's an analogy for the tech.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're using this historical context to show us how censorship mechanics are evolving within technology. And just as a quick reminder to you listening, we're impartially reporting the source's views on these political regimes and tech ecosystems. We aren't endorsing them. We're looking at the author's argument about how these systems operate.
That's a vital distinction.
Yeah.
The threat the author is highlighting is what happens to collective human thought patterns when you combine the purging of heterodox or unconventional thinking with the unprecedented global scale of these new AI technologies.
But let me pause you there because I'm genuinely trying to wrap my head around how this actually works.
Sure.
If an AI is fundamentally just math and code, if it's just processing inputs and outputs, how does it learn to change the subject so smoothly? Like, how does an algorithm know to be evasive?
It comes down to hard-coded parameters. Developers can install specific guardrails, weights, and filters within the system's architecture.
Oh.
They explicitly train the model to recognize sensitive concepts or entities and route the conversation away from them.
Okay, that makes total sense. It makes me think of a massive, beautiful physical library. You walk in, and you can ask the librarian for almost anything. But certain aisles, like entire sections of human history or controversial thought, are just silently boarded up with drywall.
Yes, exactly that.
And the librarian doesn't say, you aren't allowed to read those books.
Mm-hmm.
The librarian just smiles, pretends those books never existed, and asks if you'd like to see the gardening section instead.
That is a perfect visualization of deliberate, hard-coded censorship. The developers intentionally boarded up those aisles, but the source material takes us a step further, into an area that is arguably much more insidious.
Which is?
Well, if developers can intentionally board up the aisles of the library, what happens when they let the AI wander the open aisles entirely on its own?
Oh, wow. It turns out the AI starts building its own walls.
Exactly. This is the problem of unintentional censorship through the illusion of AI objectivity.
And this brings us right back to the scenario I mentioned at the very beginning of the show, because the author shares this highly specific, truly fascinating anecdote to prove this point.
I love this example.
It's so good. So the author of our source text is AI Weiwei, who is globally known for advocating for human rights and minority groups. And he took a selfie with Alice Weidel, who is the leader of the Alternative for Deutschland, or the AfD, which is a right-wing populist and nationalist party in Germany.
Right. Two figures who exist on completely opposite ends of the political and ideological spectrum.
Exactly. And just to frame this properly, again, the author isn't trying to make a political statement about the AfD or endorse these specific figures. We were just recounting the source's anecdote here, impartially.
Right. It's just a stress test.
Exactly. They're simply using this extreme contrast as the ultimate stress test for the AI's logic. Because the photograph was real. It happened. But when the author asked ChatGPT to analyze this real selfie, the AI confidently misjudged it. It declared that the photo had to be a fabricated image, a fake.
And we have to look closely at the rationale the AI provided for that conclusion.
Yeah, why did it say that?
Because it wasn't looking at digital artifacts. It wasn't analyzing lighting inconsistencies or looking for pixel manipulation around the edges of the faces. Its logic was purely narrative.
Narrative logic.
Yes. The AI concluded that an advocate for human rights and migrants would never pose for a selfie with the chair of a right-wing nationalist party. Therefore, the image must be fake.
Okay, hold on. I need an explanation here.
Yeah.
Because if the AI is looking at an image file, how does narrative even factor into it? Like, how does a machine that processes pixels suddenly start making assumptions about human sociology?
That's the key to understanding modern multimodal large language models.
Okay.
When an AI looks at an image, it's not just seeing colors and shapes. It translates the entities in that image into concepts text tokens.
Oh, okay.
So it identifies AYY and connects that to millions of data points about human rights activism. It identifies Alice Weil and connects that to millions of data points about right-wing populism.
Okay, so it built a profile for both of them.
Yes, and in the massive multidimensional mathematical map of its brain, what we call a vector space, the concepts associated with a global human rights advocate and the concepts associated with a far-right politician are located incredibly far apart.
Like physically distant on the graph.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They exist in completely different mathematical clusters. The distance between them is huge.
So the math says they shouldn't mix.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Because they almost never co-occur in the AI's massive training data, the probability of them co-occurring in reality registers to the AI as an extreme statistical anomaly. It's mathematically implausible to the system.
Wow.
So rather than accepting a complex, contradictory human reality, the system defaults to the statistically safe answer: fabricated image.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It wasn't looking at the real world at all. It was basically reading the room of its training data, analyzing society's assumptions, and deciding what was statistically plausible. I mean, think about that for a second. Have you ever trusted an AI's conclusion just because it sounded incredibly confident, complete with a polite tone and perfectly formatted bullet points, even though it was completely blinded by its own mathematical assumptions?
It happens all the time.
It forced a messy human reality into a neat, predictable statistical box.
And that is the core takeaway the author highlights here. AI cannot deliver factual, objective judgments when it comes to complex human realities. It draws on prevailing moral codes and social narratives embedded in its data.
Which means it's biased by default.
Inherently. This inevitably leads to simplistic, entirely erroneous conclusions. It edits reality to fit the average.
So if AI is constantly just regurgitating pre-existing assumptions and smoothing out the messy contradictions of real life, what does that mean for the creation of new ideas?
That is the big fear.
Right. If we are only ever fed the statistical average of what humanity has already thought, how do we ever think outside the box? Which leads right into the author's incredibly stark view on big data itself.
The author draws a very intense comparison here. He likens the explosive growth of big data and AI to an irreversible virus, or like a pandemic infiltrating the central nervous system of human cognition.
A virus. That's heavy.
It is a biological metaphor for a technological process. The argument is that big data fundamentally reduces nuanced human thought into banal, homogenized content.
The source actually uses the phrase waste management to describe this, which, I don't know, I just question that. Waste management sounds incredibly dramatic for an app that just helps me outline a presentation or summarize a PDF. Like, how is AI acting like a garbage disposal?
It sounds extreme until you look at the mechanics of what the AI is actually doing. The author argues that AI unconsciously and indiscriminately recycles, reorganizes, and reapplies knowledge.
Indiscriminately.
Exactly. To process centuries of human intellectual history in an instant, the AI has to strip away the organic context. Human experience is reduced to what the author calls vectorized data.
Okay, pause. Vectorized data is one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot in tech articles. What does that actually mean in this context? Break that down for me.
Sure. Imagine taking a deeply complex, nuanced human emotion, say, the bittersweet feeling of nostalgia, or the profound struggle of a philosophical contradiction.
Okay, I'm with you.
To an AI, that isn't a lived experience. To process it, the AI must turn that emotion into a coordinate on a giant multidimensional graph. It turns the concept into a vector. You strip away the poetry, the historical context, the human tears and sweat that went into forming that idea, and you leave only a mathematical point in space.
So you lose the soul of the idea and you just keep the coordinates.
Exactly. When you vectorize human experience, you strip away the organic logic that nurtured the thought in the first place. What's fascinating here is the existential paradox the author points out.
Which is what?
While AI is frequently championed in the media as being non-ideological, we like to say it's just a tool, it's just math. But the author argues that this hollow mechanical processing is actually an ideology in itself.
Because it forces all of human history into that same homogenized mathematical format.
Precisely. And within that void, the very architecture of critical perception is being reshaped. If we only interact with vectorized summaries of human thought, it fundamentally alters the formation of ethics, belief systems, and self-awareness. It creates an intellectually diminished society.
It's turning the deeply human experience of figuring things out into just another data point to be processed, which brings up a really uncomfortable question.
Let's hear it.
If this technology is actively eroding our critical perception, if it's homogenizing our thoughts and acting like an irreversible virus, why are we all rushing to use it? Like, why are we downloading these apps and integrating them into every single part of our lives?
Because it's easy.
Right. And the source gives an answer that hits right at the ultimate human weakness, our absolute desperation for convenience.
Yes, the source explores how we celebrate modern tech specifically for being convenient, instant, and effortless. We treat those qualities as the ultimate goal of innovation.
We really do.
But the author introduces a powerful counterargument. Every truly meaningful, memorable human experience is rooted in struggle. It's rooted in perseverance and the complexity of overcoming challenges.
Take a second and think about a time you had to learn something truly difficult. Maybe it was a new language, or a wildly complex piece of software, or, how to play an instrument.
It takes time.
Yeah, and when was the last time the struggle to learn something actually made the knowledge stick? The frustration, the mistakes, the sudden breakthrough, that's what makes the knowledge a permanent part of you.
The exhilaration of human effort.
Exactly. Relying entirely on AI to do the thinking for you is a lot like relying entirely on a GPS to get around your own city.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
At first, it's incredibly convenient. You don't have to think about which street to turn down. But after 5 years of just blindly following the blue line on your screen, your internal compass completely atrophies.
You forget the roads.
Yeah. If your phone dies, you suddenly realize you can't navigate your own neighborhood. You didn't just save time, you lost the actual capability of spatial awareness.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. You are outsourcing your cognitive mapping to a machine. And the danger isn't just that we become a bit lazier.
Right.
The danger, according to the author, is the erosion of our fundamental ethical foundations. Concepts like effort, sacrifice, responsibility, and duty, the very things that build character and human dignity, they're disappearing because they're no longer required to produce an output.
The output becomes everything, and the process of getting there means absolutely nothing.
Which leads to the source's grim conclusion about where this leaves us on a macro level. The author argues that humanity has created a tool that essentially renders the existence of the individual self meaningless.
That is incredibly bleak. How so?
Because the mode of individual existence, your unique struggles, your flawed reasoning, your specific human journey, is being erased and absorbed by AI's massive collective knowledge structures.
It just swallows it up.
Yes. Human value is being replaced entirely by the logic of profit and efficiency. The author describes this current era of intelligent machines as a new, savage, warring states period.
Warring states.
It is an intense country versus country, corporation versus corporation competition driven by vast capital and vested interests. And the individual is just caught in the crossfire, stripped of their inherent value.
So it's not just a technological race to build better software. It's a race to capture, vectorize, and commodify human cognition on a global scale.
Exactly.
We are looking at a system where the unique, flawed, struggling individual is viewed merely as an inefficient node in a much larger, perfectly smooth, highly profitable network.
If we step back and synthesize this entire journey we've been on through the source text, a very clear, very stark picture emerges.
Yeah, let's recap this.
We started with the rapid market disruption of tools like DeepSeek in 2025, which laid bare the strategic panic and the blunt reality of deliberate censorship. The AI simply refusing to talk about uncomfortable truths because developers boarded up those aisles.
And then we moved into the open aisles, examining the more insidious, unintentional censorship, where AI's reliance on vector spaces and mathematical distances leads to completely flawed conclusions, like we saw with the misjudged selfie of AIYO and Alice Waidelь.
The AI assuming reality is fake because reality is too mathematically messy for its training data. And that mechanical smoothing over of reality leads to the profound existential warning from the author.
The waste management.
Right. Big data is functioning as intellectual waste management, stripping the organic soul out of centuries of human thought to create vectorized, banal content. And because we are so seduced by the convenience of the GPS, the effortless output, we are willingly trading away the struggle and perseverance that actually give human life meaning and dignity.
We're voluntarily giving away the process of thinking.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of the source's argument. The unification brought about by AI has accomplished what traditional, heavy-handed censorship systems could never quite achieve.
It's invisible.
Yes. It has trivialized politically correct discourse and replaced humanity's capacity for true dissent and critical thinking with total statistical conformity. The transformative power of heterodoxy, the ability to think differently, to go against the grain, to be the anomaly in the data, is being systematically neutralized by the very tools we use to access information. This raises an important question. If knowledge is only valuable when it is understood and applied critically, what happens when the critical apparatus itself has been outsourced to a machine?
So what does this all mean? That is exactly the question we need to be wrestling with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. We've covered a lot of heavy terrain, from the hidden architecture of vector spaces to the philosophy of human struggle. But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over, something that builds on everything we just discussed.
I'm ready.
If AI effectively removes the struggle from generating ideas, if it mathematically smooths over all our contradictory, messy, heterodox thoughts into one homogenized, perfectly acceptable average, what happens to the next generation of rebels, artists, and innovators? If there is no intellectual friction left in the world because the machine has sanded off all the edges, how will we ever spark a fire? Think about that the next time you open a prompt window and ask an AI to summarize a complex topic for you. Until next time.